Hello, seniors. This is Mrs. Gottnicki, and the purpose of this screencast is to tell you a little bit about writing introductions and conclusions, to demonstrate how I wrote both for my paper, and also to share with you a couple resources that you'll have available to you. The first of which is currently up on the screen, and that's the Thesis Introduction Conclusion 1920 Google Slides presentation. I'm not going to walk you through this presentation because it's very self-explanatory in that you will be able to go through slide by slide yourself, read what's present on the slides, and understand the material there. It's not difficult. It's really just a matter of reading and knowing what options are available to you. Instead, I'd like to take this time to share with you my draft and also show you some of the decisions that I made so that when you're thinking about writing your introduction and conclusion to your paper, you have an example to follow. So, as you probably remember, the topic for my paper is what are best methods of distance learning, and so I thought, well, I can introduce this paper and make a strong hook just by talking about the circumstances that are happening in our world right now. So that's very much what I did. And as you'll see here on the right-hand side of this page, each time a word is highlighted, I have left you a note, a margin note, and I've explained to you what I'm doing in that particular sentence. So what I recommend that you do is work your way through my paper and take a look at the different parts of these two paragraphs in particular. There are really three components to an introduction, and that is a hook, some background information, and then last but not least, the thesis statement. And the thesis statement is going to reside at the end of your introductory paragraph. I have left this little note in my paper. You should not, but it's here so that you can see how I integrated my thesis statement into my paper. You'll also notice as I've scroll down through that my paper is now double spaced, and I did that, I'll show you a couple of tricks. I did that to get a sense of just how long it is, and so I used the key command Control A, which highlights all of the text of a paper, and then I used the line spacing tool up here on the margin and I selected double. And that allows me to see the length of my paper. And that was helpful for me because one of the things that I needed to do, in addition to writing my introduction and conclusion, was to trim down some of my monster paragraphs. So as you scroll through, you can see I've left the color in. I'm still in rough draft mode here with this paper. I have left the color in, but as you look at my paragraphs as I scroll through, they are 3/4 of a page in length, half a page in length. I was going for no more than 3/4 of a page, really. And when it started to get well beyond that, then I looked at the paragraph itself and said, all right, how can I make this smaller? What is the logical place to break this paragraph? So if you're interested in looking at exactly what I did, you could always compare rough draft number 4, which is where I currently am, with rough draft number 3, and that had my much longer paragraphs. Okay, now I want to jump to the conclusion paragraph since I'm down here. And I want to show you the conclusion also, 3 things. It is first of all, a restatement of the thesis, and it is important to state it differently. So when I restate my thesis, I don't look at the language I wrote initially. I think about what it is that my paper argued, and I find a new way to say it. And so you can see how I wrote that there. And then I have to, and this is probably the trickiest part, and I have a method for doing this that I'll share with you. Then it is important that you sum up the arguments or the strongest arguments you made in your paper. And this is difficult to do with a paper that is 7 pages long because it's hard to keep all of them in your head. And so my method is to I start at the top and I go to my first body paragraph and I skim it and I ask myself the question, what is it that I'm saying in this paragraph? Like, what point am I making? And then I write it down as a margin note. And ideally, I like to do this on paper, but many of us don't have printers. And so I thought, okay, well, I can add a note. And that's as simple as going up here and you can, under one of these tools, you can insert a comment. And I'm on a Macintosh, so this is the Apple key, but there might be a key command for you as well. So under the insert menu, I insert a comment and I sum up in my own words what the point of that paragraph is. I do that for every body paragraph that I have. Now, if I split a paragraph in two because it was a monster paragraph, well, that gives me the option at that point. I can look at those two paragraphs together and say, well, they're kind of the same thing. I take where I have a slight subject shift and I make it a new paragraph. And so at that point, I may say, all right, I'll sum up two paragraphs at once, but perhaps they're different and I want to only sum up each paragraph. But you make that choice as a writer. And so as you can see, I work my way down here. Then you have a series of comments that are spread across 7 pages or so. And so rather than try to scroll back and forth, what I did, and I'm jumping over here to a new blank document, is I simply copied them down from each of my comments. And so that meant that I went into this comment itself and I simply triple click there to highlight the material. I Control C or right click and copy it. And then I come back over here and I paste it, okay? Then I have still what is probably too much information because I need to say some other things as well. And so before I talk to you about how I put them all together, I want you to know that the last thing you need to do in your conclusion is to address the question of so what, right? You've got this long paper here and your reader at this point might be wondering, well, why should I care, right? So what is it that's so important about your topic? Why does it matter, right? That so what is very important, and that's something you want to leave your reader with. So that takes up a little space, right? It also takes a little thinking. So back here to my conclusion planning, I then look at these sentences and I more or less write. Notice how I've started here with noticed here that I've started with the first statement, right? And I try to add a little bit of language to help the reader understand what's important about that particular statement. And that also kind of is going to do double duty in my conclusion because that's going to help me come full circle to the idea I introduced in my introduction. So you can read my statements here. You can see how I put them together. And then last but not least, you can take a look at my sentence down here at the end, coupled with this little blurb in the beginning. This is why it matters, right? So as schools navigate the challenges brought about by the coronavirus and look to the future, it would be well worth their while to consider how distance learning might change the landscape of education, ideally for the better. So that's my so what statement. And that also has the effect of addressing and bringing my reader full circle to the point I made at the very beginning of my paper and what I chose to use as my hook sentence to grab the reader's attention, which was the fact that the coronavirus has shut down schools since May 16th. So in summation, I'm pretty happy with how those two things came together. Now, for the rest of my paper, I'm not done revising. As I was going through this, I noticed that a lot of my analysis is not so much analysis as it is a bit of restating the point that's being made in color. So that's something I need to look for. I need to go through and say, am I actually saying something different, or am I simply repeating what has already been said here? Okay. Another thing that I particularly need to look at is I read a lot of research studies. So in this case, I know that I have cited the research group and the year in which it was published or in which the study was conducted, but a lot of times I may not have done that, so I need to look for those as well and to make sure that I fully cite that information in case the reader wants to know that. And then last but not least, what I need to do also is to make sure that my body paragraphs, especially when I get to the end of a subtopic, right? And in that case, I'm going to know I'm at the end of a subtopic because I have a new subtopic sentence here that's still in bold. Have I concluded that section of the subtopic with my own wrap up, right? And I do that by looking back up at my initial topic sentence and I say, okay, what point was I making? And then why is that point significant? So you can almost think of each body paragraph as a mini paper, right? Because each body paragraph or each couple of body paragraphs, if you had to split them into more than one, is about a different subtopic, and you have a different point to make about each different subtopic. So be sure that those sections end with your word and they also end with you being very explicit in your explanation about why that particular subtopic is significant. So those are things I need to do as I continue to work on my revision, and I'm going to share all of this with you. Unfortunately, not via Google, but what you'll see is I've saved this for you as a PDF. I had to do this because our technology team has changed the parameters for viewing Google documents, and so you will be able to see my fourth rough draft here with comments in a PDF document. If for some reason or another you cannot view this PDF document, please let me know and I will be able to, I'll try to help you. One more thing I want to leave you with before I finish. I also wanted to see how long my paper was. And right now I'm at 8 pages and I'd really like to get it to 7. So another thing I'm going to be thinking about as I revise is how can I tighten up my language? Because if I can write the same paper that I've written in 8 pages in 7 pages, it's actually a better paper. So I'm going to be looking for that sort of thing. You can see my works cited citations are all here. They're not properly formatted yet, but we'll tackle that in another lesson. And also down at the very bottom of my paper, I've still got this extra information. You probably remember that from my rough draft. And I have it here still because this is a rough draft technically, and I'm just going to leave it for the time being in case I find some use for it. But if I don't find a use for it, by the time I move to the final draft, that will disappear also. So as always, stay safe and please reach out with questions.